Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I want to talk to you for a bit about Hatoful Boyfriend. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a sort of otome parody that released back on the Vita back in like 2015, but I never got around to playing it, even when they gave it away for free on PlayStation Plus. So that was a bit weird. Thankfully, I still had this copy lying around because someone suggested it to me, and I was like, you know, I never got around to actually playing that. I wonder how it is. I'm gonna be honest to you, it was fucking miserable for multiple reasons, and I'd like to take the time to go over them. The first thing I want to point out is that, as I'm showing on the video right now, there isn't that much in the way of options, and frankly, this game as a visual novel is kind of miserable, because it feels like it's a visual novel made by people who've never played a proper visual novel in their life, which is ridiculous because it's a parody of an otome game that was made in Japan. When I first played it, I thought to myself, there's no way that this game wasn't made by like English language people making fun of otome, but no, it turns out this was made in Japan, so there you go. But yes, this is a visual novel, and it's missing a lot of the trappings that most visual novels have. It doesn't have an automatic text mode, which would be really useful. It's only got a skip mode, which skips stuff you've already seen, but it's kind of balanced out by the fact that the text speed meter doesn't go to instant. It only goes up to pretty fast, but not instant. I usually prefer instant text, especially in games that don't have voice acting, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't go instantly, but the skip text button scrolls the text in and then skips it. So if you're a fast enough reader, you can actually use that as an auto mode, but you will start missing lines eventually. It is very quick, so it's very annoying actually trying to play it. There are also multiple points, and by multiple points I mean several dozen, where the skip will just automatically turn itself off. It's after choices or after scene transitions, which is incredibly annoying if you're trying to replay this game, because it's got something like 10 to 12 endings that you need to get. You need at least 7 of which in order to get to the game's like main route. It's really weird. So whenever you're trying to go through really quick, you have to keep going back to the game and hitting the triangle button or making decisions, and it gets really annoying really fast, which isn't helped by the fact that the game has multiple situations where the cursor will stop, the game will practically stop in its tracks, and you'll be wondering, oh, what am I supposed to do? It'll be like on a blank screen, or it'll be like, you'll be waiting for text to come across, and you'll be like, oh, I have to press the X button to make this continue, and that's what you do, and that's what it does. It doesn't make any sense. It feels like this game wasn't actually tested by anybody, which really makes sense because if I'm being perfectly honest with you, this port is garbage. So, for those of you who are in the know about Vita games, this is made in Unity. Yeah, you can kind of tell where it's going already when it comes to that. And it has no excuse. It's just like the house in Fata Morgana, which was also based on Unity, and also performed really badly and has no excuse. This game takes it a step further by having this stuttering going on whenever the bird art is fading in and out, having really bad crackly music if you're doing anything other than a really slow playthrough, and it came so close to freezing hard enough to crashing multiple times, and I'm like, this can't be like in the PS4 version, but I actually ended up looking up a trophy guide just so I could keep track of who I'd gotten routes for, so that I could, you know, keep track of it and not accidentally go over a route that I'd already done. And it turns out, as I was reading this trophy guide, it says, make sure you save often during the true route, because the game is very crashy. And this is for a trophy guide on the PlayStation 4. So, yeah, that's not great, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. It's not great at all. So all of that stuff put together basically makes trying to play this as a visual novel miserable, because it's so stuttery, the music sounds terrible when it starts glitching the hell out. Everything just feels particularly slow, especially when you have to be constantly coming back to hit the triangle button. Excuse me. When you have to be constantly coming back to hit the triangle button in order to speed through the stuff that you've already seen, because despite the fact that a run through this game can take less than an hour, even like the first time through when you're not skipping stuff, you'll still be seeing the same events over and over again eventually. And it just gets incredibly frustrating to go through over and over again. As I said before, you have to go through the game at least 5 times-ish in order to get to the true route. Although, if you do happen to stumble across another route, you'll basically just like flunk out. But here's the thing. This game is absolutely obnoxious with what it wants you to do for the routes. So, in this game, there are some characters that have just one route. You go down it, you're done. But there are some characters that have 2 routes. So, you've got the regular route, and then you've got the true route. But the only way you can access the true route is by when the game gives you the option to go to like gym, math, or music class, is to be constantly focused on one particular thing. So for one character it'll be math, for another it'll be music, for another it'll be gym, you know, that sort of thing. But, and this is a big but, if you want to get the absolute 100% true epilogue to this game, not only do you need to go down every individual character's route, except for one that they added in the PlayStation versions for some reason, but you need to go down both the route that isn't the true route and the route that is the true route for every character that has 2 routes. So you have to go through the game once in order to, not pick the perfect set of stats for them. Then you need to go through it again with the perfect set of stats for them. And the difference between the 2 routes is usually like 1 minute worth of text on either side. And that is fucking retarded. That is legitimately one of the most retarded things I've had to deal with in a visual novel for some time. And it legitimately pissed me right the fuck off when I learned that this was a thing, because it's just hilariously dumb. It's a romance game, man. You don't have to make it so that that sort of thing is a thing, because you're just going through the same shit you've already seen twice for something that's there for 30 seconds on the end. And I mean it, you literally do have to go through both both eventually in order to get the true epilogue. Which I did not bother with. When I learned that that was a thing, I was like, fuck this game with a chainsaw. And I just went for the routes that I needed to do to get the true ending. Although the trophy guide and the 100% achievement guide wasn't really very precise about it, because as soon as I got the 4 routes I thought I needed, it still didn't let me through, so I had to go do a couple of extra ones just to make sure. But yes. So, I haven't talked about the actual plot yet. And to be fair, the premise of this game is the only remotely interesting thing about it. So, the way things work is that it's a world full of pigeons. You're a girl, and you need to try and date birds, more or less. That's like literally the only memorable thing about it. And there's a reason for that, and for those of you who have been playing visual novels for long enough, and I'm just going to warn you now, I'm going to get into spoilers, but I will say this, the story for this is not worth playing through, because in the first half of the game, which is basically just the otome stuff, where you pick a character and you go with them, usually that's the sort of part of the game where you want to be getting used to all the characters in question. But here's the thing. Every single character in this section of the game is a one-dimensional, more shallow than a kiddie pool character, and none of them are particularly interesting, except for one, who I ran into in my first route, but I literally learned nothing about him up until the last 2 minutes of the game. And that's how the game goes for the first few routes. You've got a bunch of characters that you barely learn anything about up until the last 2 minutes, at which point they go mood whiplash on you by smacking you in the head with a hammer of an emotional problem that that character has. And most of the time it doesn't even resolve it. And it's incredibly unsatisfying. If I'm comparing it to something along the lines of Muv-Luv, where you get a ton of time with the characters, you get to engage with them in multiple situations, and you get to really learn who those characters are before they hit you in the face with the emotional problems. In this game, they try to compress it down into nothingness. As I said before, even if you're not skipping, your first run of this game is probably going to take you less than an hour. And that means that you basically get no time with these characters whatsoever. You just get these really short, like, soundbite level interactions with them, which means that they don't really feel interesting at all until you get to their emotional problems, at which point they whack you over the head with them and then either resolve or don't resolve them inside of like 5 minutes worth of text boxes, even if you're not skipping. So it just feels cheap, is the main thing I'm trying to say about it. The emotional development, the character development, and even the writing, it all feels cheap. It's all got cheap jokes strewn throughout it, which aren't particularly clever. They drop fourth wall breaks all throughout, which just aren't particularly funny, but I mean, it's a Devolver Digital game. They published it, so I kind of understand what they're going for there, but it just doesn't work in this context. And there's just, even the main character isn't particularly interesting until you find out the backstory, at which point, again, spoiler alert starts now, she's dead. Because here's the thing. I compared this game to Muv-Luv earlier, and if you've played Muv-Luv, which you should, by the way, if you're watching this video, you probably still have a Vita at this point. Why the hell haven't you played Muv-Luv yet? But for those of you who haven't played Muv-Luv, you start out in the traditional high school drama slash slice of life slash harem sort of thing, where you pick your girl, you learn their problems, and you try and help resolve them over the course of a relatively decent length. And then once you had, originally at least, once you had finished the routes of Maya and Sumika, it would give you the option to start playing Muv-Luv Unlimited, where the main protagonist of that is lifted out and dropped into post-apocalyptic, basically fighting for his life, more or less. This game pulls a similar trick, and seems to be becoming a much, much more popular trick with the introduction of games like Doki Doki Literature Club that have like these weird twists that happen towards the end. And basically everything in the Otome part of Hatoful Boyfriend is building up to this point, where basically you get all the information you take from all of the routes that you come down, and you take that into the ending, and that's how they justify talking about certain things. And it's not like they don't pull it out of their arse. They have a lot of foreshadowing. I'll give them that. It's not like all of this shit comes out of nowhere, right? Everything that you hear about is more or less explained, but yeah, basically you've had more or less no time to associate with these characters. You've had no time to really feel bad for them outside of these emotional problems they all have. But once the other shoe drops and it goes into the final route, which is the they call it the bad boys love route, which honestly makes no sense because there really isn't that much love in it. It's more or less about all the other characters trying to solve the main mystery behind what's going on in the school. All of the emotional problems, well, some of the emotional problems, I should say, some of them don't get resolved, some of them do. But the thing is, they try and turn it into a more character-driven story, but the thing about all the characters is that, as I said before, you really haven't had that much time to get to know them. They just feel like paddling pool depth sound bites more than anything else. So it just feels... I'm not satisfied with the way the game ended, because I wasn't satisfied with the amount of time and like the little effort that they put into making me care in the first place. Because especially when you get to the bad boys love route, and there's Sakia, who's one of the main characters. He acts like such a bastard that it's almost impossible to give a shit about him. And this isn't an uncommon thing amongst the entire cast. Now, there is one character who has an emotional breakdown. There is one character who just kind of feels like they're there, more or less. I don't want to get too much more into spoilers, but basically, they just kind of start... The way the ending works is a bit weird too. So, the way it works is you don't learn that much. Basically, the first entire, like, 2/3 of the game is just trying to roll up all of the mysteries that you've got going on so far while adding on a couple more and then trying to solve them along the way. But then towards the end of the game, they start throwing, like, emotional problem after emotional resolution after emotional problem after emotional resolution at you. They start explaining characters' backstories with such speed and such little, like, detail going on that it gets hard to keep track of all of it. You'll get one character's backstory, then you'll immediately get another character's backstory, then you'll immediately get another character's backstory, and it's all done so quickly that it starts to feel like a joke, like an actual joke, not a parody, not any sort of like poking fun at the otome genre. It's just so slapdash that it feels pointless. It feels like that nobody really took the time to pace it out properly. It feels like that nobody took the time to really make you care about the characters. It's just so weird, honestly. You care so little about these characters because of how they act, or because of the fact that every single route turns out the same, where they just feel the need to bludgeon you over the head with an emotional whiplash at the very, very end. And I just stopped caring after a while because it became so predictable. All of the characters didn't give me that much to go on. They didn't really give me much reason to like most of them. And yeah, just when it comes to the ending, when all their backstories started getting revealed so quickly that it felt almost ridiculous, I didn't care. That's the thing, I really didn't care. And I really don't know what else to say about it. It's just, it doesn't work. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, it just does not work. The characters are not interesting. They feel like one-dimensional, like, knockoffs of proper otome characters that should have way more depth and intrigue that they really do, but they try and compress it into such a small runtime that it just doesn't really work for me. Because we don't really learn too much about them. We don't get to spend too much time learning about their personalities. You get some events along those lines, but they're just so quick and quaint that I don't get what I'm looking for out of it. And yeah, once you get to the end and everyone's backstory starts getting revealed, I just didn't care. It's that simple, really. The writing just isn't that good. The overall premise, while a clever idea, isn't really held up too well, and it isn't helped by the fact that they try and retell the same story towards the end of the true route more than a couple of times from different angles, and it just starts to get confusing about who did what and why. And yeah, that's basically all I've got to say. The characters aren't interesting. They feel one-dimensional. They feel shallow. And you don't get enough time with them to really get a sense on all their personalities outside of, like, one note of their personality. And then at the very end of each of their routes, it'll give you an emotional whiplash that completely destroys the tone that they were going for, only to reset you back, and you've got to do this, like, several times, so it becomes predictable, and none of the characters become likable at any point, except for, like, the only character I really liked during the otome route was Nageki, I think his name was. And it just doesn't, like, work for me. It just doesn't... His character didn't even really work for me that well either, because he was the route that I went on first, right? And I basically learned nothing about him, because he's such a quiet dude, more or less. He doesn't tell you anything right until the very end, and then you have to wait until the true route to get more information about him. And then the rest is just not that deep characters having not that deep emotional problems, which have really simple solutions and just feel like dumb people being dumb. And then when the bad boys route comes along, again, it kind of feels like a parody of all of those other sorts of stories where they're constantly throwing, like, revelations and backstory at you after, like, 2/3 of just wandering around with a character that's really hard to like. And then, yeah, and then at the end, it's just revelation, 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 and that's it. And I stopped caring at some point, relatively early on. With that said, I have 2 more points to make. One is that I found it absolutely hilarious It was such a weird juxtaposition. So as I said before, when I was going through the first main route, I got to the end of the game, it cut to credits. I actually skipped the first frame of the credits because the game's technical performance is so bad, and I ended up on the second frame of the credits, which immediately lists at the top, all the music was done by Kevin MacLeod, and I burst out laughing, because that's the thing, apparently. I just thought that was hilarious. I have no idea why. It made me laugh more than any of the jokes in this game. And the second thing is that despite the fact that this game is nothing but simple two-dimensional art, a bunch of bird pictures, and some text, the game somehow manages to take up 2 gigabytes of space on a PlayStation memory card, which it absolutely cannot justify to save its life. Because the game just does not have the sort of resources needed to make that happen. Like, all of the music tracks that they've got in the game in MP3s, all of the art that they've got going, all of that should take up 200 meg max. There is no reason for this game to take up 2 fucking gigabytes. It doesn't have any openings or endings. It doesn't have any voice acting. It doesn't have anything along those lines. And yet the game is absolutely goddamn massive for no reason whatsoever. So, yeah. And I was so disappointed to find out this port was done by Abstraction Games. They're usually way better than this. At least from what I remember. But yeah. Overall, it's a technical nightmare, which is an absolute chore to play through. None of the characters are interesting. The eventual, like, twists and turns you get at the end of the plot are just so uninteresting due to the fact that I wasn't able to get invested in the characters in any way, shape, or form. And it feels so incredibly compressed to the point where the fact that all the routes turn out to be mostly slice of life with no information whatsoever, followed by an emotional whammy that happens that just turns out to like feel like a joke just due to how quickly it's over, and then it just repeats itself multiple times, meant that I was feeling incredibly jaded by the time I got to the final route, and I couldn't care less. This is a game that I personally cannot recommend whatsoever. And you'll know that by the fact that at the end of this footage, I quit out and I delete the game from my memory card, and I do not plan on playing it again. There is apparently a sequel called Hatoful Boyfriend Holiday Star, which takes place in the same world, but none of the events of this game ever actually happened. So I just don't see the point of picking it up because I didn't like this game very much in the first place. So there you go. This has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.